right, welcome to East Lansing City Council regular council meeting, Tuesday, June 20th, 2023. I'll begin with a roll call.
Councilmember Brookover.
Here.
Councilmember Garcia. Councilmember Watson. Here. Mayor Pro Tem Gregg. Here. Mayor Bacon.
Present. Next up, item 1.2, approval of the agenda. I'll look for a motion.
I move to approve the agenda with the addition of a motion to excuse Mr. Garcia tonight because of his professional commitment.
Second.
Moved by Councilperson Brookover, second by Councilperson Watson. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Agenda carries. Next up, I'll look for a motion to approve the minutes from special regular council meeting June 13th, 2023, and regular city council meeting June 6th, 2023.
So moved. Second.
Go again. I'll pick one. Moved by Councilperson Brookover, second by Mayor Pro Tem Gregg. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye as well. Motion carries. All written communication received by council are posted to the online agenda packet. That's all communications received before 4 p.m. Next up, communication from the audience. If you haven't had a chance yet, feel free to approach the podium. You'll have 5 minutes, and just please fill out one of the blue forms with your pertinent information. All right. Seeing none, I'll see if there's anyone in the online queue.
We do have one caller in the queue. Caller with the name Harold, you're welcome to address council.
I have nothing to address council with.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And making sure, let me double check, make sure I didn't miss anyone. Any communication from the audience? It's going twice. Okay, just double checking. Communication from Mayor and Council, Councilperson Brookover.
Nothing, thank you.
Councilperson Watson.
No, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Gregg.
I don't have anything tonight either.
And I'll let the city things come from the city manager, but I'm definitely going to speak to, and you'll hear more of us kind of speaking to kind of the events of this weekend. First, I want to thank the city manager as well as Chief Johnson and others for their quick response to the events of this weekend and some events of terroristic and anti-Semitic acts posing a threat to our community. Thank you for the swift response from both federal, state, and our local law enforcement to respond and keep the community safe. You'll hear a lot more from us as a city on this moving forward. I was able to talk this weekend with Rabbi Bigman and talk with Andy Shore as well, and just really sickened by the events and the danger posed to the Jewish American community. You will hear more of us as a city. We stand in solidarity with the community and all our interfaith and faith communities, but you will see some additional action as well as some other things that will take place. And also thank you to our local East Lansing law enforcement for extra vigilance and support of the synagogue with extra patrols and making the people feel very safe over the weekend, coming off of their Sabbath and now approaching High Holy Holiday. We'll continue to be vigilant. We'll continue to support the community, and hate speech, language, or action is not tolerated in the city of East Lansing. But you'll hear more from me on this moving forward. We'll have some actions around this. This won't stand. That's it. City manager's report.
I too will be very short. I just wanted to echo your sentiments with regard to our thanks to our state and federal partners and local partners, and our being extremely pleased that they made the arrest before anything could happen, and we just want to stand in full support of our members of our Jewish community, and again, there will be, I'm sure, additional follow-up later, but just wanted to say thank you to all involved in making that apprehension. Also just want to remind people of the Summer Solstice Jazz Festival this Friday and Saturday. We encourage you to if you have an opportunity to come down and participate and listen to some good jazz and enjoy the festivities there. And I think that I will leave it at that at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. City Attorney's report.
Just briefly, Council, as you are aware, and consistent with the communication I provided you on Friday, the Human Rights Commission did forward a complaint that was issued or filed against DTN Property Management to the Council and requested additional action be taken. I just wanted to make sure the Council received that communication, and I will work with the Mayor to figure out the best path moving forward.
I'll ask it like this: is if we want to have further discussion, does it elicit a closed session if we want to discuss it based on the subpoena request?
Yes, we could do. There are several routes we could take, and so I'll work with you on what we recommend.
Let's talk about it on July 11th.
Great.
Next up, special presentation, East Lansing Independent Police Oversight Commission annual report.
Hello, this is Eric Williams, Chris Root, on the Police Oversight Commission. Chris will handle most of this, and I have very little to say. Thank you to Council for giving us some time on the agenda. We have been in business since October of 2021, and we just completed our annual report. It's something like 18-month report. We've been working on this for several months, and I've just recently been immersing myself in a report that came out of Minneapolis. I was up in Minneapolis last week, and they have the Department of Justice just released their investigation report following the Minneapolis riots and murder. And they went into the police department there with a fine-tooth comb. And I was very impressed and glad to see that our complaint system in East Lansing is a lot better than what they had in Minneapolis. We've got a much more rational process. So I think the city of East Lansing and our ordinance can be, we can be proud of our ordinance and our process. We've had, I think we get about 10 complaints a year, and we've handled those. We get about 5 and 5. I think we've taken no action on 5 of them and made recommendations on about 5. I guess if you ask me what accomplishments we've made in the last year and a half, it would probably have to do with the use of force reports that are published on our website. And I must say that the use of force reports are largely written by Captain Pride from the police department. They're a very detailed set of encounter reports where various kinds of force have been used in encounters between citizens and police officers. And they're on our website, and anyone can look at them and get a good feel for how policing works on the street. And I might say how, in some instances, how policing doesn't work on the streets. But they're a good source of anecdotal data that people can use. We have such a small city, such a small police department, that it's possible to write up all the incidents where force has been used. So I think my count is about 250 encounters since October of 2021. And so that's something that we have that a larger city doesn't have. We can look very closely into the workings of the police department. In the 18 months that we've been in business, obviously the largest use of force incident was the Meyer shooting in April of last year, and I kind of have a ghoulish take on this, and as I look at these incidents, uses of force, minor and major, I see them as learning opportunities. As you get into the details of complaints, use of force reports, the details of what happened at Meyer, it allows you to lift the hood of the police department, look under the hood, and see how the mechanism works. And as we do that, we can get an idea of what, if anything, needs to be changed in order to prevent the next incident, to reduce over time the level of violence in policing. I guess my hope for the future is that we will have develop a regular practice in East Lansing of reviewing incidents, not with the goal of finding who's responsible, because this is a system. I didn't realize that looking into this, coming into this. I analogize it to McDonald's. You go to a McDonald's restaurant, they give you the hamburger, and you think that's the transaction, but there's a big back office to McDonald's. It's an international back office, and there's so much that goes into producing that hamburger. And the same thing operates with East Lansing Police Department. That's the local restaurant, but policing is a network, it's a system of components that not even all the police know are there. It's a huge network, and police accountability is a really big problem. It's a really big job to pursue. And we've only got 11 people on our board. All of us have day jobs, and we have very little time and a very big job to do. And one of the suggestions that I have before we go to Chris's presentation of the innards of our annual report is that we should think about developing a formal process for reviewing major incidents, very major things like that Meyer shooting and somewhat less major incidents. And I think we should think about involving the union in that process as well, and avoid, to the extent that we can, scapegoating people. There's a man that was shot at the Meyer store, and as it turns out, he was the one who was prosecuted coming out of that incident. And to think of him as responsible for what happened at Myers is to miss the point. And I'm coming to think that to think of the individual police officers who were involved in that incident also misses the point, which is the behavior of the system, the behavior of the organization. And we should be able to, we should think about sitting down after these incidents and looking to what operational changes we might make in the way policing is performed that could be preventive, prevent the next incident. It's something that happens in manufacturing and healthcare and transportation, but much less so in policing. I think we might be able to push ahead. As I say, we have 11 people on the commission. Most of us have day jobs, and Ms. Root is semi-retired and has a lot of time to spend on this work, and she has. So I think Ms. Root gets the credit for producing this report, and I'd like to turn it over to you to take it away.
So if you could just go to the 5th slide, new findings about policing. I continue to find it a privilege to work with Eric. Eric has a depth of historical knowledge. You know, the fact that he's talking about the report regarding Minnesota that was, I think, released on Friday does not surprise me at all. So he's very frequently the big picture person on the commission, and I am very frequently the detail person on the commission. And that's what we're doing tonight, too. There are actually 5 members of the commission who helped to write this report, who actually wrote parts of the report. And the entire commission reviewed every single section and voted individually on every section. So my view is that it was very much a commission effort. Even though people put different numbers of hours into it, lots of people contributed. And that's how it becomes a report of the commission. I don't look at it at all as a report of an individual. So, as I say, I'm the detail person, and there are quite a number of topics we want to share with you tonight. So I did write something out. My focus in this part of the presentation is on 2 topics. The first is new things we learned from writing the annual report. I'll also talk about a few of the report's recommendations, of which there are 31, and I'm going to talk mostly about ones dealing with data management and reporting. To start, where did new findings in this report come from? As Eric mentioned, the ordinance creating the commission created some new requirements of the police department. One was to create the monthly narrative reports about use of force. There was another to create biannual reports of interactions with people from vulnerable populations. And the third source that we were working from is redacted investigation reports of individual complaints. Also, the ordinance provides that the commission can request information from the police department with fewer restrictions and delays compared to if we had to use FOIA. And it's very helpful that that is spelled out in the ordinance so that we've got a baseline to work from. Finally, I estimate that we spent at least 300 hours researching, writing, and editing the report. So that gives you some time to think about things and try to see what you can learn. So next slide, please. Here are some of our key findings. Can we switch to the next slide? Oh, all right, mine isn't going, that's all right. In 2022, ELPD officers used force against many more black people than white people. 93 black people compared to 61 white people. In other words, 56% of all uses of force were against black people. These data are from the monthly narrative reports. On its face, this large racial disparity is very troubling. It is also quite different from findings in the CNA report that was presented to Council in December 2022. In our annual report, we discuss one possible reason for this difference, which concerns a larger number of people described as unknown race in the data CNA was given. Next slide. In terms of encounters with individuals in crisis, of the 114 use of force incidents in 2022, 34, or 24%, involved people experiencing a mental health crisis. These interactions can be complex and difficult. This suggests that there is a need to improve use of force policy and training about these kinds of incidents. Captain Pride recently shared with the Commission that 15 ELPD officers have taken Crisis Intervention Team, or CIT, training, and 8 more are taking it this year. CIT training is a 40-hour curriculum for police officers aimed at reducing the risk of serious injury or death in interactions with police in a mental health crisis. Our recommendation 4.5 suggests tracking whether officers' use of force in such incidents decreases following CIT training. Such reductions might be included in the Early Intervention System, or EIS, as a positive indicator of an officer's performance. Next slide. The public data about officer-initiated contacts is quite limited. Is that where we are? Yes. Okay, good. There appears to be significant racial disparities in these contacts, which has increased recently. From April to December of 2022, African Americans constituted 34 to 38% of people involved in officer-initiated contacts. Let me point out that these contacts are not the same thing as traffic stops. Roughly 90% of these are probably traffic stops. The rest are involving pedestrians. Our recommendation 6.2 calls for further study of racial disparities in traffic stops when data becomes available to analyze that stops and also what follows a stop can be analyzed. Whether there's a search, whether there's contraband found, and if a citation, arrest, or warning is given. Next slide. Now I want to turn to the issue of data. Many problems that the Commission identified were also highlighted by CNA when it comes to data management. Next slide. Thank you. This slide, which is quite complicated, shows one example of a data problem: how information in ELPD's data management system inaccurately assigns all types of use of force at an incident to all officers who were involved in that incident, even though the department has data about individual officers. This could disadvantage officers by exaggerating their use of various types of force. Another example involves the racial disparities data that I was talking about earlier with another slide. When we were looking at use of force involving 167 people, we had to count by hand 23 individuals who had force used against them when there was more than one person involved in the incident. Had we not done this, 14% of the people against whom force was used in 2020 would have been left out from the data. But counting by hand is not really a solution to data management over time. It is complicated to record data so that you can analyze 3 different things: the number of incidents of use of force, individual people subjected to use of force, and individual police officers using various types of force. But that's what's needed to create meaningful reports. When you try to actually make sentences out of the numbers, it's about people and officers and incidents. It's not all about incidents. That leaves out people, who are the folk we care about. And I'm talking about all the people involved. But there are good models for how to report this data. It is possible, and in the one of the things we did in preparing the report was to look for good models. And if we go to the next slide, the report from Washington, D.C., the Metropolitan Police Department there is a very good model. Many hundreds, if not thousands, of small and medium-sized police departments have similar problems to East Lansing Police Department's problems with data management. It does take resources and capacity to do this kind of monitoring. Now that the council is committed to independent oversight by setting up the commission, it's important to develop the capacity to produce accurate data that can be reviewed and analyzed over time. In addition, there needs to be a commitment to report this information regularly to the public. If East Lansing can make significant progress on these fronts, that would be of wide interest because this really is a very, very common problem. Next slide. This last slide shows 3 recommendations for ELPD, the Commission, and the Council to cooperate to build a high-quality data system. In recommendation 4.1, the Commission concurs with CNA's recommendations calling for implementing a new use of force reporting system that allows for better information entry, case tracking, review, analyses, and summary report creation. In recommendation 4.2, the Commission suggests that it could work with ELPD to identify a new system for data collection procedures, a data management system, and analysis of regular reporting. We suggest setting a goal to have a new system in place to analyze and report use of force data for 2024. That's an ambitious agenda, but I think sometimes setting a goal is important to getting there. In recommendation 6.1, we thought about how the council could be helpful, and 2 things struck us. One is the council could seek a schedule for regular reporting by ELPD to the city council and to have material posted on the police department website. It's important for information to come to the commission, but it's also important for it to come to council. The commission shouldn't sidestep the council. Also, of course, it's the council that is in charge of the budget, and it's up to the council to ensure that there's adequate capacity and funding to do this new level of work. So what is the best and most cost-effective way to develop the data management system and analytical capabilities that are lacking? Perhaps an expert consultant could establish and document a system and train staff to implement it. That's one possibility. Speaking of collaboration, a subgroup of the Commission is meeting with Chief Johnson on Thursday to discuss a request he made in March that the Commission make recommendations about ELPD's public disorders policy because the CNA report said it needs a major overhaul. We also are continuing our work on the Commission to respond to the petition from East Lansing community members to develop recommendations about ELPD's use of force policy, including at a workshop we're planning in September. We're eager to hear from you at any time about what work the Council would like us to pursue to implement the Police Oversight Commission ordinance. We welcome your questions and comments.
Questions?
I had a question. The public disorders ordinance that you just referenced, is that the same as the disorderly conduct ordinance?
No.
Okay.
It's very easy to slip and think about that. Public disorders, there's lots of different language that's used.
Sure.
What this is about is large crowds.
Okay.
It's about it's about
We never
political
have
protests
those, so that's not a
and
problem.
couch burnings and flipping cars, which are really 2 very, very different categories
Yes.
of events. It's not mass shootings, that's different. But it's things involving large crowds on the streets.
Demonstrations.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know,
Or
demonstrations.
just mass actions.
You know what, I'd welcome more demonstrations and less sports-related celebrations in heavy quotation marks. Thank you for the
That's why it's a
clarification.
complicated policy, needs to be a
Yeah.
complicated policy, because it deals with very different things.
Thank you for the clarification.
And I'll say, thank you for your work, first and foremost that's a ton of work and effort.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for the recommendations as well to council.
I wanted to echo the thanks. Our police officers have a very, very difficult job and have to make extremely tough decisions quickly and often without full array of information. But those of you that sit on that commission have a very, very difficult job when you go back and review the actions of the police officers. I know there is natural tension as you're looking and trying to, identify what appropriate level of force is and what excessive force is, and it is an extremely difficult task, and I thank you so much for your work. I wanted to know if there were a couple questions that came to mind and maybe a comment, but the first was and some of it you addressed, the ability to get good data. So when you look at the numbers and the raw numbers that show that, more people of color, for example, are in physical confrontations, are there things were you able to disaggregate certain variables to see if there were things that would distort the numbers? So, for example, if there's a particular individual who might have mental health crises or different things that might show up multiple times, so 10 or 12 or 15 times, were you able to drill down to that level of detail to see if there were, I'm thinking about in my old job as fire chief, we would have what we call frequent flyers in the medical arena that would, use the service much more often than others. And so I didn't know if that can explain some of it. It's not to say that still makes anything okay, but I just wondered what your abilities were to look at the data. And then also if there was event-driven types of things that also caused for more interaction or engagement. So whether it was the result of any particular events or any particular establishment or anything like that, if that was data that was readily available. I would like to reiterate what you stated about the importance of knowing, the officers that engage and how often that's happening. I want to be careful I say it because I know that, different work shifts and other things can also impact the days that you work. However, also, and just speaking very candidly from my own experience in the field, people that would push the envelope, and unless there was an immediate supervisor a field supervisor, not the chief or someone up higher. It has to be somebody present that will often, without a whole lot, said or done, could get people to pull back on certain behaviors by just, making them aware that they are overreacting or they are being watched or those types of things. And so I think it's critically important to identify where there might be a problem, to have that consultation, and then to try to moderate behavior. And again, I know these are extreme cases, but I think about the Derek Chauvin case and how it landed on everybody. I'm sure everybody in this room, but there was certainly my own experience, and there was certainly there was a part of me that knew that wasn't the first time he had done that, and that he was allowed to go further and further and further. And there were other bits and pieces. When someone says they're a FTO, that means that's the field training officer. That's the person that trains other people. So when you watch some of those things, and just knowing, again, perhaps maybe I'm making assumptions, but I know in my own experiences when I was a lieutenant or captain and I would stop someone and say, we don't do that, their behavior would change not only for that incident, but for future incidents, because they would know that supervisor doesn't play those games. But I also saw the opposite, where people would sit by quietly. And I'm not talking about here. I should make a statement. I wasn't in the field here, so I should clarify that. But I also saw the opposite, where people did not say anything. And then the next time you were dealing with someone, they went a little bit further, and a little bit further, and a little bit further. So I applaud you for doing this. I know it's a very, very difficult job. I know Captain Pride, appreciate all that you guys have done and to listen and engage and be involved as well, because I know it's not easy to have people scrutinize your work and look on your work, but I think it's a critical part of the system and the process that's necessary to have that checks and balances. So thank you. I really appreciate that your recommendations are some things that perhaps can be done immediately and be impactful, and I encourage you to continue to offer feedback and oversight. And I really, while I'm here, I don't get to speak. I try to stay away from the commission to not stifle conversations sometimes. I should say that, but I would really encourage commission members to, if you have not, did a ride along with police officers. I really think that should be a part of serving on the commission, just to see each side of that. And I, you know, if you haven't had an opportunity to do that, especially with the events in East Lansing, when we have big events, I think it would be also beneficial for members of council and others. So thank you for your hard work. I'm sorry I didn't mean to speak too long, but I really appreciate what you've done and the balancing act that is involved.
I think, Chris, to your point on the question on the data moving forward, obviously with something me and the mayor pro temp specifically think a lot about is with the major events. And there's going to be some changes to how those are kind of adjudicated, and you're seeing the movements of with the Big Ten and night games and alcohol in the stadium and this, that, and the other. I'd be curious to segregate those particular dates and pull them out of the data and get a look at it, what's going on those nights as they make changes to what these night events are going to look like.
I think I just will kind of chime in with that on personal experience. I was able to do a ride-along at our second to the last rivalry game. I would be actually surprised if there was a spike in data on those nights, because the number of people in the community is so overwhelming that there are probably less arrests than usual, because our officers are pulled in so many different directions, and there's a reluctance to take an officer off the street for any period of time. And so people, I know there's a lot of frustration within our community that we don't see follow through on some of the more egregious actions from those incidents. And it's because it's really just a numbers impossibility to police those crowds the way that we would police downtown on a regular Friday night. When you have, you know, tens of thousands of people in our town, and we have, even with support from other jurisdictions, you know, at most hundreds of officers, taking any one of those officers away to book somebody or to escort somebody to our jail really reduces the numbers by a percentage that we just can't absorb. And so, although I would be curious to see the data for those days, I would also just caution my fellow council members and the commission to not discount the fact that that is a very different police experience than our regular things, and that it might not show the reality of those days.
You can see in some of the anecdotal reports, the beginning of the term, and St. Patrick's Day, there are some spikes.
Yeah.
You can also, one can. I've been reluctant to do that, but going through the use of force reports, names of certain officers show up and show up and show up. I'm kind of reluctant to call out people individually. The police department has a early warning system that has much more robust data, but it's a personnel type of system that is internal. It's one of our problems is that we are independent of the police department. They treat us like members of the public, so they don't tell us everything that they know. How that early warning system works, how that personnel system works, would be something to look at if you have entree into the management of the police department.
share what you just said. Public Act 312 is something that, I don't know if they've taken a lot of time to go through and educate and learn. I'm not trying to insinuate you don't, but there are a lot of things that are required under Public Act 312 and also that are not permitted and that could jeopardize your ability to take disciplinary action, do other things if you don't work within the framework of Public Act 312. So sometimes that happens as a result of Public Act 312 and what's required. I'm not saying I don't know the circumstances, but I know that had similar experiences with our ability to deal with staff in certain situations that because of labor laws and rules that are required under 312. So.
And that's part of the design of the oversight, of the oversight ordinance, is that everything we have is public information. So we're treated as a conduit to the public, and that means that the firewall is between us and the police department. So they don't give us any information that they're not willing to give to the public. It makes the East Lansing Oversight Board different from most police review boards in the country that have some entree into the management system, management information systems of the police department. We didn't set up ours this way because we wanted to be transparent to the public, and that comes with the trade-off.
Questions?
I have a comment. I think I'm the only member of council standing from when we actually created the commission. And so it's been my privilege to kind of watch you guys grow in this role. And I know that there have been some changeover in commissioners and that there's been tension between the commission and the police department at different times, which is not unexpected. And I think that I've seen recently effort on both sides to kind of put good first and cooperate together. I think Captain Pride has been, as far as I know, a helpful contributor to that, and I know that all of the commissioners really put their heart and soul into this work for the benefit of our community. And so I just wanted to thank you for your service and thank you for kind of growing this commission from the ground up. It's not an easy thing to create a body like this, and that I think even with the growing pains, seeing the kind of results come out of it has been very gratifying. So thank you for your time and commitment.
I wanted to just say how much I appreciate the LEPOC commissioners. And they represent our community. And some people in our community feel very strongly one way or feel very strongly another way. And so it's been great to work with the commission and try to have discussions that fairly represent various people's voices in our community or who come through our community. And it's very hard work because discussions around police can be very heated from a personal level, from looking at data level, from regard for the people in service or who are serving the community. So I just appreciate the commissioner so much. You all work tirelessly. And I was on the Human Rights Commission when we would get a annual report from the sheriff on incidences, and it was really hard to track and understand and see any issues. And so we've just made great progress. In my humble opinion, I'm done looking at data and seeing if the data makes sense on racial inequities, and definitely like seeing the work that we should start doing or continue doing so that we can address this. Sometimes people wonder why the focus is race, and that is because racism is deeply embedded in all of our systems. And so when you address racism and when you look towards racial equity, then you make things better for a lot of groups. And of course, me, as a Black mother, as a Black person, I want to see better. We deserve better. We exist here too. And so just again, I appreciate the work that our LEPOC commissioners are doing. And I also believe to this day that the Meyer incident would have been worse for our community if it wasn't for the LEPOC commissioners being in place, because again, they represent diverse voices and they represent thoughts and feelings of our community, and our community had multiple places to go to process that day and express themselves as well, which is important. So thank you all, and thanks to the commissioners, and that's all for me.
Would ask that, and I don't know if it could be changed on this particular presentation, but it would be nice to have all of the commissioners' names, if they're willing to share them, added as a slide, I think, for all their, to be able to recognize all of your hard work.
It is in the annual report.
They're in there.
In the
slides.
the bigger slide
Okay,
presentation. Yes.
can do that.
I did have one more thing to add, I forgot. I think a lot about things happening circularly. Like, I don't think things should just be hierarchical, where you're just hearing negative feedback from your supervisor if you're a subordinate. And so the subordinate should also be able to give feedback to their supervisor. And so to that similar tune, the encouragement of LEPOC commissioners to go on police rides, I also think that the police should come meet our LEPOC commissioners so that there is also that circular understanding of what it is we're about and that we are in this together. It makes sense to have to be able to be one of the very few positions where you can actually use lethal force for you to be held accountable to the community and for you to see that as something positive. So I also encourage our police officers to come to meet our commissioners as well.
Thank you. More questions or comments? Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much.
Next up, item 4, consent agenda.
Thank you, Mayor. Item 4.1, approve the following appointments or reappointments to boards or commissions. Brock Howard to the East Lansing Meridian Water Sewer Authority Board for a partial term ending December 31st, 2024. David Lederber to the Downtown Development Authority for a partial term ending June 30th, 2024. David Lederber to the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority for a partial term ending June 30th, 2024. Rebecca Kaysen to the Human Rights Commission for a partial term ending December 30th, 2025. Item 4.2, approve a conditional Class 3 rental license with one additional condition for 210 Center Lawn, allowing up to 2 unrelated persons or a family to occupy the property. The owner is Ken Carlisle, East Lansing, Michigan. Item 4.3, approve a conditional Class 3 rental license with one additional condition for 3986 Gallup Road, allowing up to 2 unrelated persons or a family to occupy the property. The owner is Fanichowdhury Gade, East Lansing, and the local agent is Tara Thada, Okamus. Item 4.4, approve a conditional Class 3 rental license with one additional condition for 3322 Hamlet Circle, allowing up to 2 unrelated persons or a family to occupy the property. The owner is Shelik M. Afzal, Texas, and the local agent is Tomas Brown, East Lansing. Item 4.5, approve a change order to the material testing services contract with Professional Services Industries, Inc. in the amount of $110,000 and authorize the city manager to sign. Item 4.6, approve a change order with Levitt and Stark Excavating, Inc. for the fiscal year 22-23 miscellaneous sidewalk program in an amount of $75,000 and authorize the city manager to sign. Item 4.7, approve an agreement with Rowe for engineering services associated with the fiscal year 2024 major streets improvements on Hagadorn Road in an amount not to exceed $245,355 and authorize the city manager to sign. Item 4.8, approve a one-year extension to the WRRF emergency and as-needed instrumentation and control services contract for UIS SCADA, Inc., and authorize the city manager to sign. And item 4.9, consideration of a policy resolution 2023-9, a resolution to provide funding from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, for the fiscal year 23 hazardous sidewalk program.
I'll look for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Gregg, second by Councilperson Watson. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda carries. Next up, item 5.1, consideration of special use permit site plan application to renovate the building at 212 Abbott Avenue and expand the existing restaurant with a new Class C liquor license.
Good evening, Council. Tim Dempsey, Interim Director of Planning, Building, and Development. So before you this evening is a public hearing for the expansion of space adjacent to Jolly Pumpkin. Jolly Pumpkin currently operates with a small distiller, small winemaker, and brewer license. What they're seeking to do is expand into the space to the west, about just under 5,000 square feet of space that would become MASH East Lansing. That would be an additional restaurant space that would be connected to Jolly Pumpkin. With that new operation, the owners would have a Class C liquor license that would serve both Jolly Pumpkin and MASH. So that would be a change in license type. So this expansion of a use with a special use permit does require going through the process with Planning Commission and then here, obviously, with all of you at City Council for a public hearing. The seating for MASH would be an additional 150 diners at seats for 160 total capacity, in addition to the current 236 that's in Jolly Pumpkin, so that's a total capacity of 396 between the two operations. They're also proposing to have outdoor dining, 20 seats that would be in front of their space. And again, the space is just to the west of Jolly Pumpkin, between, of course, Jolly Pumpkin and then the Bank of America space that is adjacent to where the proposed MASH would be located. So with that, we've included in your packet the staff report, the Planning Commission minutes, and then the full set of plans for the space. But I'm happy to entertain any questions before you open up the public hearing.
Any questions from council? Just a quick one on the, is there any special use or anything else that needs to occur separately for the outdoor seating change?
No, the outdoor seating would be included as part of the site plan application. I should note, though, that they, of course, would also have the option to do additional outdoor seating with Albert Al Fresco if they so choose to add additional seats through that process. But the 20 seats would be available during the regular season outside of Albert Al Fresco.
Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, so in terms of the planning function, you said the occupancy would be what, 300 and something?
Yeah, the total between the two would be 396.
Okay, so in terms of the planning function, how do you calculate, if at all, the parking needs per that number of people? Is there any kind of a quota or ratio?
Yeah, so what we did when this project was originally approved in 2017, there were assumptions made about the retail use throughout this space, so that parking determination was made at that time.
So,
we believe there's adequate parking to accommodate.
okay, but
Not-
the original calculation was assuming this was going to be a bar restaurant, or this was going to be a retail of some other kind?
It was a general commercial, so it wouldn't have been specifically restaurant per se.
Okay, thank you.
Can you further explain the distinction between the liquor license that they're operating with now and the different liquor license?
Yeah, so the current liquor license allows them to sell their own products that they
Okay.
produce as a manufacturer, and then they can sell those on site. The Class C liquor license would allow them to secure not only beer and wine, but mixed spirits or distilled spirits that are not their own, so they could bring in brands and other types of spirits outside of what they currently sell.
I guess I assumed that they already had that. I didn't realize that they were fully in-house, which just tells you how much I drink, which is none. So, okay. Thank you for the
Sure.
explanation.
Number 9 that talks about the persons under 21 years of age. Is that consistent with other planning commission decisions to do the 11 p.m., not midnight?
Yeah, this has been a standard requirement in all of our restaurant approvals for a number of years now. So the Jolly Pumpkin currently has this in their requirement, so it's consistent with that.
And just to ask again, like the Graduate, the roof on the Graduate, is it 11 p.m. or midnight?
I would guess it's 11, but I can't be 100% sure. I'd have to research that to verify.
Thank you. I'm just thinking again about the person that came forward the other week, and also thinking about those venues and spaces for our folks that are under 21 years old. And I even wonder if it would be cool if restaurants that will let you be seated and, have some pop, advertise that so that people know where they can go downtown, and maybe they'll understand there's more opportunities downtown too for them. But thank you for that.
Sure.
Questions or comments? Hearing none, at this time we'll open up the public hearing.
Good evening, Council. I'm Kelly Allen here tonight this is Tony Jeske. He's the general manager at Jolly Pumpkin. I do represent John Carlson's group of Jolly Pumpkins all over the state. I want to thank your staff so much. So great to work with, Tim. Thank you.
Can we have you pull the mic down? I think
that's-
you're shorter than the last person.
True. So I just want to let you know we're here.
He was serious. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He was serious.
No, I can hear you fine. I don't think the edges can
I'm
get.
5 foot tall. So.
Yeah.
I wanted to let you know we're here if you have any questions of us. Your staff did a marvelous job putting this together, but we can certainly answer any other questions that the public may have or you may have.
Thank you. Anything from the public? Online?
No callers in the queue.
All right, one more call to the public. All right, hearing, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. All right. Any further questions or comments from council?
Are we moving this tonight, or is it just the public hearing?
You can act on this evening if you so choose.
Okay. I'll move approval of the site plan and special use permit for BL Mashies Lansing LLC to open a restaurant which serves alcohol in the white box space at 12 Albert Avenue, subject to the rather substantial list of approve recommendations from the Planning Commission, 24,
Correct.
if that's sufficient.
Second.
Is that sufficient, City Attorney? Do we need to? Okay, good enough. Okay. Moved by, who moved? Did you move it?
I moved it, and Dana seconded.
All right, good. Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Gregg, second by Councilperson Watson. Any further discussion? Hearing, seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries 3-1.
Mr. Dempsey, that's not the first compliment I've heard of your department this week, so thank you guys for all the hard work that you're putting in.
Thank you very much. Item 6.1, consideration of budget amendment fiscal year 2023 for various funds in a combined amount of $8,405,765.
Good evening, Audrey Kincaid, Deputy Finance Director. So we've been talking a lot about the 24 budget, but we still haven't finished fiscal year 23. So this is our last act for fiscal year 23, reviewing all of the funds to make sure that we're in compliance with State of Michigan budget law. So this budget amendment looks a little more robust than it maybe normally does for our final one of the year. Just based on timing of some of the labor contracts being signed and our auditor recommendations, they just kind of missed the first amendment that we do in fall and October. So we're kind of capturing all of those things tonight, as well as reviewing all the funds to make sure that we're in compliance with the Budgeting Act. And so I'll kind of go through each of the categories and let me know if you have any questions as I go. So the first two categories were partially reviewing the Uniform Chart of Accounts and State of Michigan law, and as well as recommendations from our auditors where we could be a little more specific on our functions versus our activities in the way that our resolutions are adopted. So if you remember, our resolutions are adopted by appropriations by functional level. So in the general fund, we have general government, public safety, public works. And the Uniform Chart of Accounts has some more specific categories. So within general government, identifying city council, city manager separately, and other police and fire separately from public safety. So we're trying to accommodate some of those recommendations. And then the second piece of that is capital outlay, which should be shown as a totally separate function. So we used to have capital outlay buried in public safety or public works, depending on what the purchase was. And this is disaggregating it from those other functions. In the fiscal year 24 budget, we were able to, timing-wise, we were able to already pull out the capital outlay piece, so you would have seen that in the 24 resolution. We weren't able to do some of those activity versus function levels just based on timing, but we will have a 24 budget amendment with those after we kind of hear some feedback from our auditors and how they feel about how we've broken those things out. Then the third category is hazard pay non-ARPA. So last spring, we approved ARPA payments to full and part-time employees, but then in July 1st, after July 1st, we also had an additional $500 to most employees, full and part-time employees. Based on their union contracts, there might have been a slightly different amount, but those were paid, and those were not paid using ARPA dollars. Those were just separate hazard pay amounts agreed to by each contract or by the non-union personnel memos. So it's accommodating, because that was not budgeted, it is using fund balance of all applicable funds. Then the next category is ARPA retention pay. So this is related to what you just approved last week, because it relates to, the first payment would relate to January through June of 23, even though we're paying it in July. Accounting rules say that because it kind of belongs to the period of performance in 23, we have to record those expenses in 23. So again, not budgeted, but this one we're not using fund balance, we're using those ARPA dollars to offset the expenditures. And then that final other column is kind of our all-encompassing everything else that we know we're expecting, where we might have areas of over budget. A majority of that, almost half of that, relates to the income tax. Because the income tax is performing better than we were expecting, we were able to send money to the general fund for public safety, to make those supplemental pension payments, and also to send money for infrastructure based on the charter. It's probably a pretty generous estimate, but we have to budget for the most that we might spend so that we don't get to a point, if we collect more, that we aren't hamstrung by the dollar amount that we have budgeted. So then other various things throughout there. If you have any questions, everything hopefully was explained in the memo, but I can answer any other specific questions.
I'm sure it was explained in the memo, but now you're going to have to re-explain it to me, please.
Okay.
I don't want to take up a lot of time, but so if I was at the top of the world looking down, I think what you're saying here is there's an increase in revenue for this fiscal year. Is that correct?
Yes?
Okay. And what's the total increase in revenue? Do you have that figure?
So that total budget number is both the increase in appropriations and the increase in revenues. So $8,405,765.
Okay. Is the increase in revenue, and you're going to offset it with increases in expenditures, correct?
Correct. There may be some areas where we are increasing our use of fund balance. I don't know that number. I could figure it out, but I don't know it off the top of my head, which is specifically revenue versus increased use of fund balance.
Okay, so I guess one of my questions is, if we're having increased revenue, I think what you're telling me is we're using more fund balance? We're going to use more fund balance?
So if we have expenses in one column, we have to offset it by either revenue or additional use of fund balance. I'm not sure what the makeup of those two separately are.
Okay, so we don't have enough increased revenue to cover the increased expenditures, is that correct?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then I guess to the income tax question, being this is probably the most unencumbered year, and as well as with the information from the state, are we thinking we have a kind of a water level on the income tax at this point from this year, or not quite yet?
That's hard for me to say. Just my experience with it is a little less than I would like. I think we're coming out of COVID and we're seeing positive experience from that, or more return to work. So I think we're seeing positive revenue increases. I don't know if this is kind of, and we also have additional revenue from compliance efforts from historic years. So I think we got a lot of those historic years and caught those people back up. So we may not see the same level of revenue from those compliance efforts going forward.
Got it. Questions?
I move that we approve the amendments to the budget as proposed in the report given to us tonight in the combined amount of $8,405,765.
Second. Further discussion? Moved by Councilperson Brookover, second by Mayor Bacon. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much. You run the next one.
I'm going to briefly take over when Mr. Bacon takes a break so that we can keep this moving. Hi. Looks like, hang on a second, I am still in the consent agenda on my screen.
6.2.
6.2. Oh, I guess I read liability and insurance and I thought it was the consent agenda and I didn't realize that we're not. All right, sorry about that. Back on track. 6.2. Consideration of the liability insurance package presented by Arthur J. Gallagher Risk Management Services, Incorporated, for the period of July 1st, 2023 through July 1st, 2024, and the combined amount not to exceed $797,693.55. That seemed really critical that we get those 55 cents in there. And to authorize the finance director to sign all documents necessary to bind the insurance coverage. Penny, I think this is the first time you've joined us at the table for a presentation. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Penny Wright, Finance Director. I'm presenting the general liability and excess workers' comp coverage for the upcoming fiscal year, which will go into effect July 1st. I'm so sorry. Arthur J. Gallagher is the agent for the city, and I want to mention that Ryan Doyle is on the line to answer any questions when we're through. Same as in the past years, Gallagher reached out to different companies. They obtained different packages and prices, and they presented 2 program options for us to review, but they were at a higher cost than in prior years. The main policy differences between the 2 options is the deductible amount on the general liability and property lines of coverage. Program 1 is very similar to the current coverage in that retains the $50,000 deductible. This is an increase of almost $260,000 from last year. Program 2 would increase the deductible to $100,000. It's at a additional cost from last year of $225,000, but it also increases the risk to the city with that higher deductible. The cost increases are reported to be a result of industry-wide issues, which are, gosh, I can't think here, lack of competition, higher cost, and then also increased risk to public sector. Program 1 was selected as the new fiscal year recommendation because it keeps the coverage similar to the current year coverage. This increase was not anticipated, and the total cost will exceed the budget by $190,000. We're also recommending that this recommendation includes spreading the additional cost across all user department funds. As I said earlier, if you have any questions, Ryan from Gallagher is also on the line to assist with questions.
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. The deductible is for each incidence that we have in terms of a workers' comp claim. It's not the total claims for the whole year.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So essentially, we would, if we choose Program 2, we would incur an additional $50,000 of expense per claim.
Per claim, yeah.
And do we know how many claims we have per year approximately?
I do not know off the top of my head.
It varies.
Because if it's less than 200,000, I feel like if it's within but okay, yeah. Obviously, we would like to have none. We'd like all of our workers to be safe. And anyway, okay. That's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks. Mr. Bacon, welcome back. Your meeting.
Yeah, so essentially, between the 50K and 100,000, the difference is 1 claim.
Correct.
Basically
Yeah.
how I'm doing table math, right?
Yes.
Okay.
What do you mean by the excess cost would be charged to user department's funds? What's apart from the workers' comp, what's the user department fund that would be susceptible to this?
So the departments that are charged for their share of the insurance cost, it would be spread to those departments, like Public Works, Fire. I don't know the split, but.
So this recommendation is saying rather than having the insurance fund absorb that full amount of that difference, we would allocate that expense to the general fund, the streets funds, all the funds that use general liability insurance, which we allocate as part of the budget via kind of a monthly set charge based on how many vehicles they have, how many employees they have, what percent use of the building they have. So spreading all of those liability costs to user departments.
Well, I get that.
Okay.
And now my question is, have we been doing that in the past?
Yes.
And there's some ratio or
Yep.
quantification?
Yep.
All right.
So
So you're
every-
just asking us to utilize the same quantification on this increase that you would have already been using to spread the cost of the insurance?
Yes.
Yes.
This is not a change. You're just going to keep doing what you've been doing for the
Yeah.
additional amount, correct?
It's just gonna be more than budgeted, yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right, thank you.
Questions?
So I see the recommendation in here is that we keep Program 1, which makes sense, I guess, knowing that each claim is potentially a $50,000 claim. Oh, darn it, I scrolled too far. Sorry. So to do this, I guess we're anticipating that this is going to be a permanent increase. Rates don't usually go down dramatically. Is there a perception of whether it will continue to increase this steeply, or is this kind of a market correction?
This is a market correction, but also we know that we have some opportunity to look into doing some policy changes as a city that could help make the bids more competitive or get more competitive bids. Okay. So we will start work on that also.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
I guess that begs the question, are there additional things we can do with policies, procedures that create less liability or make you more, almost like a good
Yes.
driver kind of thing? Are those the kind of things you're talking about?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. All right.
I move we approve program number 1 at a cost of $797,693.55.
Second.
Moved by Councilperson Brookover, second by Mayor Pro Tem Gregg. Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next up, item 6.3, consideration of a development agreement and option agreement with PK Companies and a termination of development agreement with Convexity Properties for the purpose of redeveloping the property at 333 Valley Court, formerly 341 through 345 Evergreen Avenue.
Good evening again, Council. Tim Dempsey, Interim Director of Planning, Building, and Development. So before you this evening are the agreements that we discussed at last week's work session and also back in May as well. The first agreement is the development agreement with PK Companies that would charge them with moving forward on the development of the site, which is the 333 Valley Court property, for most commonly known as 341, 345 Evergreen, and also Building C in the Park District project. With that agreement, they would have 4 years to execute on getting a project up and off the ground. If they were to fail to move that forward, the city would have, as part of this, it's an exhibit to the development agreement, an option agreement to purchase the property from them for $1.5 million, at which point the city would own it in its discretion to determine how to use it going forward. The existing development with Convexity Properties is the other agreement here that would be terminated. By agreeing to enter into a development agreement with PK and terminating Convexity would be freed of their last requirement, which was to develop this site as a diverse type of housing. Again, that's either affordable housing, owner-occupied, senior housing, or something similar to those categories. So with that termination, they would be released from all their obligations under the existing development agreement. And again, PK would now have the rights to develop the site. Happy to answer any questions. Obviously, the city attorney is here as a resource as well.
Councilperson Watson?
Oh. No.
I've been missing you.
No. Not yet.
Okay.
I mean, I guess I still have the same sour taste over this that we had last week, which I feel like I'm offered two kind of not great choices and being asked to decide between them. In the time that I have been on council, we have pushed for affordable housing in every way that we can, and this is the closest that we've gotten to it. But I also feel a little, just sort of, I don't know, I don't want to say like anxiety, but like, you know, we have a developer that made a commitment to us to build something that it turned out that they could not build. And it feels not great to just kind of let them transfer that. But I guess in terms of my own personal pettiness over that, I would rather have the low-income housing. And so my coin is kind of landing on that side. And I'm just going to put my less charitable feelings aside. I do think that this whole situation has highlighted one of the flaws in our 25% ordinance, in that we have for-profit developers that are using a very different funding model from the overlapping tax credits that need to be lined up in order to have a successful low-income housing. What bothers me is that Convexity told us they could do it, when I think genuinely they probably couldn't from the beginning because it's so far out of the way that they fund their other projects. So that's where my kind of personal irritation is coming from. But that being said, ultimately at the end of the day, what we want is low-income housing, and we finally have a developer in front of us that demonstrably can do it as they've done it in other areas. And I feel like that's our 2 steps closer to having our ultimate goal, which is, you know, LMI housing in that spot. So my personal inclination is to go ahead with the termination and follow the path that gets us closer to our ultimate goal, which is to, you know, fill in that missing middle that we've been looking at for however many years now. And I'll let my fellow council members weigh in with their opinions, but that's the side that I'm landing on.
Yeah, I'll kind of build off of that. I think it's very difficult to do affordable now that you see how it's kind of done, and it's pretty easy in the early parts to go, sure, I can do affordable. But now kind of seeing how it actually unfolds, the timelines, how quickly you have to move forward. You have to be a professional at doing affordable. So I think there is something there to be looked at via inside the 25% rule and all those kinds of things. I'd rather see us be specific and work with developers who do affordable. If we want affordable, if we want commercial, we do a commercial deal. I don't think now that I've seen a few more of these deals, they're not very compatible. And I think it's a commitment that they're making up front that is not a good deal, and they really probably don't have the expertise nor the ability to stick to the strict timelines for MISTA and other things, as they're fast-moving deals and twice-a-year windows and all the stuff they have to go through to get into these positions are very specific. So I think there's just something there to maybe have a deeper conversation around what we ask for in affordable, and if we want affordable, we ask for 100%, and if we want something else, we just ask for what we want, going forward. I think the 25% rule is very difficult, and it's kind of, we're setting them up to lie. It's kind of like a dating app of sorts. I think we put them in a position to say they can do certain stuff they can't do, or yeah, sure, I climb mountains. They want the first date. So let's maybe take a closer look at that long term, just kind of seeing how this unfolded over time. And once again, I think Tony and city attorneys and others, I think just I hear the disappointment, and I think just in the bigger deals, making sure how we write these things, that we continue to maintain leverage, in that stuff from a legal perspective, and ours from a planning perspective. It's easy to lose leverage on these deals, and once you get here, you kind of we're at their mercy a little bit. So, yeah, it's tough, but I'm here.
And I do think, moving forward, we really do need to, and obviously this deal precedes everyone up here, but I think moving forward, we really need to look at their overall development plan with the greater understanding that the city has now that these are very specialized developments that really we need to look and see if they have an actual partnership with a company like PK, which is well known for this exact type of development, or whether they just think they can do it. And so that'll be part of the analysis, but certainly making sure that the LMI contingent is on the front side of the development also, is something I'll be looking for in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Yeah, I don't understand my package. So I'm looking at page 4 of 29. I just want to make sure while we're having this dialectical discussion about all being miffed about what's happened up to this point, that we're not going to get re-miffed. That's a great word. Anyway, so Tim and Tony, if you could just bear with me for a second. So on page 4 of this, which is the part of the resolution, see where I'm talking about?
Yes.
And it defines 1A as the project definition. And in there, about 2 sentences down, it says the developer will construct an affordable housing development in accordance with Exhibit D. But I don't have Exhibit D. I don't have an Exhibit D in my package. Now, is that Exhibit D to this resolution, to this agreement we're doing? Because if it is, I don't have it, and I want to know what it is.
So we're referencing, it's Exhibit C is the site plan, and I believe the Exhibit D reference, let me see here.
Well, are we talking about the original agreement?
Yeah, so that goes back to the original agreement that was, and the original site plan that were approved.
Okay, so, and I'm in part, picking up on something that Ms. Watson has raised. So then this says the developer will construct an affordable housing development in accordance with Exhibit D. And then in this, it goes on to say the building will be constructed, et cetera, et cetera. There will be at least 72 apartments which will be rented to households making no more than 80% of the area median income. Now, without this other Exhibit D, I guess because you guys have used different terminology. You've talked about senior apartments. It came up at the last meeting, too. There was like this universe of what could satisfy these things. So could somebody repeat staff's understanding and the city attorney's understanding of what is the universe of these apartments if we pass this tonight?
So the original project called for the 72 units, and then the subsequent approval raised that up to 99 units of housing. So this statement here, and Mr. Chubb can correct me if I'm wrong, basically says that at least 72 of those, if they were to go up to the 99, would have to be under the affordable purview.
But I guess what I would like to know, and maybe everybody else in the room understands this, but how do you define quote, affordable housing development, end quote? Is that defined someplace?
So that, yeah, it would be under the 80% of AMI, but for the developer's purposes, it's going to be 40 to 80% of AMI based on the low-income housing tax credit financing that they're going to pursue.
Well, doesn't a student household, quote unquote, have qualify?
Students will not be able to qualify for this project. There's strict limitations, and anybody that's a dependent that's enrolled in school. There is, my understanding, some ability, and the representative, Mr. Horner from PK Companies, can probably explain this more clearly, but it's my understanding that those students are not eligible to live here. There are some graduate students who might be independent of parents and other financial resources that could potentially qualify in an income qualified project, but I'll defer that specific qualification to him.
Okay, well then I guess my next question to Mr. Chubb is, under this set of documents, what if that definitional construct changes under, I assume this is state and federal law, what if that definitional construct changes in the 3 years while we're waiting, while Ms. Watson and I are waiting for this to get built?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that is a potential. These are all references to incorporate the low-income housing tax limitations. They could theoretically change, but they're still going to be the the federal standard. And I mean, it's been fairly consistent. We haven't seen any drastic changes in where it establishes the group by establishing, by using income limitations, and then there are overall exemptions like students typically.
Well, because of income and independent income and things like that. Okay, so theoretically, these apartments could go to senior citizens who are at the income level, correct? All right. Okay, thank you.
Step
Can
right
I,
up.
before you
Yeah.
talk, I just wanted to provide a little bit of historical context because I have observed more of this process than maybe Mr. Dempsey's got me beat, but my recollection on the 80% of AMI and then the additional apartments was that this was Convexity's attempt to fit this into their funding model. This was their attempt to create affordable housing without having to use the tax credits. I think they wanted us to, I mean, there was the TIF financing in their original thing, but they were trying to include enough market rate in the building and make it high enough in the LMI that they could do it without having to line up all of these tax credits and stuff like that. So I think that's where that came from. Context. Thanks.
If I may, through the chair. So the definition that we have in the development agreement is just that there will be at least 72 apartments built that will be affordable, which is defined as affordable for people making 80% of area median income or lower. And that is also the highest income level that you can be at to qualify for the housing tax credit. So when we actually go and get credits, MISHDA will put a whole bunch of additional restrictions on this. So we will be renting to folks at 20, 30, 40, 50% AMI, all the way up to 80. So it's just saying the development agreement is just worded such that we can go up to 80 and that we're creating at least 72 units. In terms of whether it's marketed towards families or seniors, it is marketed towards families. Seniors are still eligible to live there though. But it's not as specifically targeted towards seniors. So Bailey, for example, is restricted to people people 55 and older. So we don't have that type of restriction here, and we don't intend to do that. I guess the term affordable housing development isn't clearly defined in the agreement, I don't think, but I think that we all know that we're pursuing the housing tax credit, and that comes with a certain set of restrictions, and those do change marginally over time, but they're generally the same. And you have to have at least a certain amount of the units at an income level below 80% in order to qualify. So the 80% is kind of it's a less restriction than what will actually be put on it by virtue of pursuing the tax credits.
Can I ask you a question while you're up at the podium? So you're inheriting a site plan that was already approved, that was developed by somebody else. And it's, I think, based on your comments at our last meeting, it's your intention to kind of take that site plan as far as it will go. Is it the 72 unit site plan, or is it the 99 unit?
It's 99.
It's 99. Okay. And under your model, that's 100% affordable, or you're still going to have market rate?
We haven't fully determined that yet, but we are considering having some market rate units in the mix.
Thanks.
And the 99 would make it how tall?
That's 6 stories with the current design.
Tim, will you say the build by date again?
So they have 48 months to commence construction of the project from the date that we enter in, if the city chooses to enter into the agreement.
I thought you would say like October or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice?
So, well,
That was a Dana Watson joke.
I'll leave that up to the developer to make those promises. I'm looking at it from the risks side, so.
And that is really a factor of this funding mechanism, is where, they want to move forward as quickly as possible. We just have to give them several bites at the apple for the MISHD application process. We certainly hope that they they will be granted it and move forward with development a lot quicker than that, obviously.
When's the next window? When do they have to, what's the?
My understanding this fall, I believe, October.
It's currently scheduled for October 1.
One.
Mission is considering delaying it to December.
Okay, I see. This agreement mentions the pilot, and we haven't voted on the pilot yet.
Yeah, that's correct. So I did want to reference that. The resolution that I made for 6.3 is because we really need to tie all of these together, actually including 6.4, which is the pilot, but that's a first reading, so it couldn't really be put in one resolution. But 6.3 necessarily, within the development agreement, references the pilot. So that is correct, and we are obligated. These are all an all or nothing deal.
So if we, with it being the first reading on the pilot and the pilot being the next thing on our agenda, are we voting on that tonight possibly, or we have to have multiple readings of that before
It's
it
the
can be?
first reading, so we'll have it back on the agenda
Okay.
July 11th.
So what happens if we pass this tonight and then we don't pass the pilot? Just,
I mean, please keep your votes consistent.
fair. So our vote on this should probably reflect our feelings about the pilot agreement as well.
Yes, they
Okay.
should be seen as all in one package. It's really necessary for this kind of funding mechanism.
Okay.
Well, let me ask a stupid question. Is there any reason not to just defer this until that and do the whole thing in one, to have the reading tonight and then have the vote on both of them at our next meeting? Especially if it looks like the deadline now is maybe December. I mean, I don't want to obstruct the process, but that gets a little weird to me.
So I think the one timing issue, and again, I think the PK companies would have to answer this question, is I think they were planning to close on the property at the end of this month. They would likely have to negotiate an extension to that, but I don't know that, I'll let them to speak to whether that's an issue or not.
That is correct. We would have to get an extension of the purchase agreement, but I don't think Dave Pearson isn't here this evening. I have no reason to believe that they wouldn't allow that if the city needs more time. We believe that the development agreement and the ordinance go hand in hand, and I believe that they should both be approved. If you're going to approve one, you should approve the other. But as to whether or not they get both approved tonight or approved later, we're indifferent to that.
So just to clarify, legally, we cannot approve the pilot tonight because it needs multiple readings?
It is an ordinance, and so it will not be able to be approved until the second reading, which will be at the July 11th meeting.
Okay, and then to just characterize Convexity's part in all of this, if they do not sell this property to you, then they are back on the hook with us to either build it or give us the land. So I feel like they're probably going to be pretty understanding of your want to extend if that's what happens.
Well, and the Convexity deal runs out when with us?
So that's a good question, and I think that would take some research, just because of, the development agreement with Convexity stated that they had 18 months after the issuance of a certificate of occupancy for Building A. That was done back in 2020. So their clock really ran out in 2022. So they're past the clock. Now, there is a provision in the agreement that speaks to epidemics. I think we can say that's equivalent to a pandemic. That's sort of not necessarily been hashed out in terms of timing per se. So that's sort of an open question.
Well, it's our call anyway, correct? Yeah, I understand what the Mayor Pro Tem is saying, and she's right, but the reality is, I don't like being placed in the position of having to say what I'm going to do on a vote that's down the line, and after all, a whole lot of things can happen in 3 weeks. So I don't know. So it just seems to me, it's logical to just defer this and vote them both at the same time, and because I actually think, I'm not going to mansplain this to you, but it seems to me it's in your credit, to your best interest, if we vote them at the same time, because if something wacky happens and we vote it in tonight, then we don't vote the other one, then it's a mess. So,
So if that's the feeling of the council, I do think that the convexity and PK would be able to make everything work with that. That would just be a motion to table item 6.3 to the date certain of July 11th council meeting.
All right. I'll look for a motion.
so moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilperson Brookover, second by Councilperson Watson, to table item 6.3 till date certain, July 11th?
11th. Our next meeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Any further discussion? All right. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
To the applicant, I'm not generally in favor of dragging people up against council repeatedly, but I do feel like, we're one council member down today, and, if we vote with one body tonight and somebody else is sick the next time, I just don't want to, I see Mr. Brookover's point, and I appreciate your patience with us.
And
Sorry.
thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah. No, we apologize for the trauma. All right. Next up, item 6.4, first reading ordinance 1522, an ordinance to provide for a service charge in lieu of tax for an affordable housing development at 333 Valley Court, formerly 341-345 Evergreen Road.
What a surprise.
So this would be the payment in lieu of taxes or service charge in lieu of taxes ordinance that would provide 4% of contract rents to the city and distributed equally amongst the taxing jurisdictions for the project. So it reduces their tax burden to help the economics in terms of its competitiveness as it seeks, as the project and the developers seek the tax credit with MSHDA.
So I do have a clarifying question. We talked a little bit about, it was in regards to the ACD development that we talked about the pilot before. So this is the first time we've talked about a pilot with this development? It's all running together. I'm sorry.
We're both seeking similar funding.
Things.
So, yep.
So with the possible variety of rents that might go into this building, anywhere from 20 to 80% of LMI, and then the possibility of some market rate as well. So anything that's below 80% LMI would be subject to 4%, and then the market rate housing would be a full tax replacement?
That's correct. Any of the affordable units per the MSHDA financing would be under the pilot. Any market rate, whether that's residential or some commercial space, would be taxed at the full amount.
And then can I ask, do you mind clarifying PKs? Are you a for-profit or nonprofit developer?
For-profit.
Okay. So I'm guessing that means that there's going to be a healthy percentage of people on the higher end of LMI if you have them. I don't know. Maybe this would be being disingenuous. But.
Oh, we have plenty of developments that we do with nonprofit partners, and we don't manage any differently if we're managing for them or managing for ourselves.
Okay.
But under fair housing, there's a lot of
First come,
restrictions
first served.
on how we can offer those apartments and who we rent to.
Okay. Thanks.
Questions?
Will this set the pace for other developers, like ACD was mentioned, but will this be something, if it's approved, that we will see come forward for each developer that's trying to offer LMI?
I think very likely it will, because of the LIHTC program is really the main driver of affordable housing in our country. There is some additional money that's being put out the door now by MSHDA through their ARPA funding, but that I think is going to be relatively short term. This has been the long-term mechanism and the main mechanism, really. So I think the pilots are going to be something we'll continue to see if we pursue affordable housing, unless the state or the feds change the game dramatically.
I guess That begs a question, Tim. Is there some standard language, as we were talking, in lieu of the 25% rule or those kinds of conversations, where we have standing language ordinances that say this, we're attractive to this, or this is what's on the, here's our standard low-level pilot, and here's what the specifics are? You know what I'm asking? Is there ways to make it more attractive to developers?
I think that would be a worthwhile conversation with some developers, particularly maybe some that aren't pursuing projects in the city, just to sit down and see what kind of deals they're structuring around the state, try to identify what other communities are doing, some best practices, and then potentially crafting a policy for council to establish, what are some of the criteria that you could evaluate and rely on going forward.
Put a pin in that.
Well, doesn't the city attorney deal with these things all over the state? I mean, I assume the law firm has quite a bit of experience, which would be an easy ask.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have dealt with these primarily previously within the city of Pontiac, but in and I've done them back, a lot of them back when I was in the city of Flint. This is just kind of a pretty standard process for the development of low-income housing at this point, or low to moderate income housing at this point, is this same mix of the local pilot with MISHDA and LIHTC funding. And so they all have kind of fallen into very similar terms for each one of them. But
I think the mayor's talking about the percentage rates and stuff like that, I think, correct?
Kind of all of it.
I just wondered if you guys, if the law firm had a broad base of experience on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And 4% is at the top or the higher end of going rates.
So in order to kind of clear this off the agenda, we do need to move the approval of the first reading. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
I will make that movement. Move to approve the first reading of ordinance 1522, service charge in lieu of taxes for the property located at 333 Valley Court, formerly 341 and 345 Evergreen Avenue.
Second. Moved by the Mayor Pro Tem, second by Mayor Bacon. Further discussion?
So if another place comes forward that wants the pilot, is it a new ordinance? Because
Yeah, so each new development would be a new ordinance in its entirety.
I think what you're asking is kind of what I was asking, if there was specific pilot language or framework we can have in place so people can look at it and show that we're friendly to or amiable to affordable. I think that's what we were talking.
Yeah.
I think you're asking the same thing.
Okay, thank
Definitely. That's definitely my question as well.
All right.
Discussion? All right. Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries and meeting adjourned.